You have said that this is the way the world works, and that in the case of pension funds, that leaves more money for pensioners. But in this case, it looks like just plain tax avoidance. This may be a legal practice, and as you say, as the world works, but is it ethical, Mr. Carney?
Recently, there have been reports of Mark Carney and Brookfield Asset Management sheltering their vast wealth in offshore accounts in countries like Bermuda, where corporations don't pay any income tax. Well, when you actually look to see where Brookfield's headquarters is, it becomes that much more ridiculous. When Mark Carney was challenged on that practice, he became visibly annoyed that he even had to answer the question.
Let's take a look. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a document from the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, Washington, D.C. You can see that this was as of October 2021. And at this point, Mark Carney was employed by Brookfield Asset Management. So just want to make sure everyone understands that. Now, you can see that they have a property, and it says Brookfield Property Partners LP at 73 Front Street, Hamilton, HM12, Bermuda. Okay, fine.
So that's not Hamilton, Ontario.
Right. And I think people have known for a few days that they've had, accounts in Bermuda and tax shelters and stuff like that. But I can't even. Let's just dive into the article, because this is where it is. More Brookfield business entities registered to Bermuda building that houses bike shop. Yeah, so right in the center, you'll see a silver car and that building behind it. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the prestigious executive offices and principal headquarters in Bermuda of Brookfield Asset Management. Now, I don't talk down to anybody that may actually live there and run their business there, but it's nigh on ridiculous when you're talking about a company that has almost $1 trillion in assets under its belt, and this is where they're choosing to actually have their principal headquarters. It's obviously not for anything but the fact that they need a physical address and nothing more. And why do they need a physical address? Because often corporations have to have a physical address in order to actually properly file taxes and be able to hold accounts and a whole bunch of other requirements. So in order to actually have these accounts sheltered in Bermuda, they most likely would have had to have a physical address. And this is it. Now, let's take a look at the work that CTV did in uncovering the story. And should mention that Vashi Capellos also contributed to this.
Several entities of global investment giant Brookfield Asset Management's core business are registered to an address in Bermuda that also houses a local bike shop, CTV News has learned. Liberal leader Mark Carney previously served as chair of Brookfield's board from August of 2022 until mid-January of this year, when he resigned to run for the party leadership. Last week, Radio Canada reported that 2 Brookfield pension funds worth a combined $25 billion were registered in Bermuda. One of the significant advantages of registering business in Bermuda is the country's tax regime. Until this year, the country did not have a corporate income tax. Comparatively, the federal corporate income tax rate in Canada is 15%. Carney's rivals, including NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, have accused him of leading a company that doesn't pay its fair share in Canadian taxes. The company's annual report for the fiscal year ending December 2024 outlines 5 core areas of its businesses: renewable power and transition, infrastructure, private equity, real estate and credit, along with other corresponding LPs or limited partnerships. 4 of those LPs are registered to an office in a building on Front Street, a busy waterfront promenade in Bermuda's capital that is lined with colorful colonial-era buildings. Brookfield's Renewable Partners LP, Brookfield Infrastructure Partners LP, Brookfield Property Partners LP, and Brookfield Business Partners LP all list their business address as 73 Front Street, Hamilton, 5th floor, Bermuda.
So why is this a big deal? Well, it's a big deal because Mark Carney has been essentially helping Brookfield Asset, which is a Canadian company, welch on paying taxes to the Canadian government. And what do taxes paid by corporations do when they're paid to the Canadian government? Well, they help fund programs, and they help actually, ideally, help the government cut taxes for everybody else. This is the issue. So you have all of this wealth that is being sheltered in offshore companies, and it's not being paid. So this is the problem, and it's billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars in taxes over the course of 5-10 years that isn't actually being paid to the Canadian government. Now, this is a guy that's trying to say, well, I know what the plight of the average person is, and I'm a hockey player, and go Oilers, and all of this garbage. Meanwhile, this guy has only spent a fraction of his adult life living in Canada.
Well, and furthermore, the Liberal Party is all, we need big government, more programs, more taxes for Canadian citizens. And yet the leader of the Liberal Party, Mark Carney, who is currently the Prime Minister, is seemingly having his business sheltered from taxes in an offshore account. Like, this is just insane.
And meanwhile, you have both the NDP and the Liberals trying to paint the Conservatives as the party that gets their billionaire buddies richer.
Right.
Like,
the irony.
Hello? You're literally the guy that you're accusing the Conservatives of helping it's just insanity at this point. Now, Mark Carney was challenged by somebody who is rapidly becoming one of our favorite reporters at CTV, Judy Trinh. She was the same person who was calling out Mark Carney on Paul Chang, and she gives no cares at all in calling him out on this. So let's take a look.
Judy Trinh, CTV News. Good morning, Mr. Carney. You were at the helm of a company that quite clearly registered much of its business in Bermuda to avoid paying taxes, including, as CTV News reported, registered to an address of a bike shop in Bermuda. You have said that this is the way the world works, and that in the case of pension funds, that leaves more money for pensioners. But in this case, it looks like just plain tax avoidance. This may be a legal practice, and as you say, as the world works, but is it ethical, Mr. Carney?
Great question.
Notice how,
his body language, she's very uncomfortable with this question.
And any joy that he had drained out of his face, and he just has this kind of scowl like, why are you asking me this question, commoner?
Well, because he doesn't want the general public, Canadians, to know that he's essentially a tax dodger or responsible for his company dodging taxes. Right.
And his response, not exactly that of the average Canadian, folks.
First off, I'm no longer at Brookfield. Secondly, this follows their arrangements follow the rules, including the tax rules of this country, other countries. And thirdly, as you mentioned in your question, that the structure is organized so that Canadian pension funds can get the most benefit for the pensioners, which are teachers, retired first responders, and public servants. Thank you.
Wow, he tried to shoot that down as quickly as he could.
And he tries to, yeah. It's okay when I do it. And first he says, well, I'm no longer with Brookfield. But you were for 5 years, guy. You were there. You were there when this was filed. And, CTV News said, he was on the board from 2022, but he worked there from August 26th of 2020, as we covered in our video the other day. So he was there even before this, this document was filed with the Exchange Commission in the United States. Sorry, this isn't a good answer. Oh, well, they're following the rules.
Again, you may be following the rules, but it's a loophole. Is it unethical? That's the question that was asked. Is it unethical?
Right.
And I would say, especially since the Liberal Party are the ones that want us all going into the poorhouse so that we can pay a carbon tax. And you may say, oh, well, Tanya, the carbon tax is at zero right now. Right, but the tax law is still there. What's going to happen after the election? They've already told us they're not getting rid of the industrial carbon tax after this election. So carbon tax, Carney, he wants everybody else, all the other companies in Canada, to be paying a carbon tax. This is just madness.
And just remember, folks, remember that when the Liberal Party put out their budget for 2024, which Mark Carney consulted on because he's been advising the Trudeau government since 2020, okay? What were they ramming down everybody's throats?
Tax fairness.
Fairness for every generation, and we want people to pay their fair share.
Right, and we want a capital gains tax increase, which they have since scrapped, probably because it got such backlash. But people are still having trouble filing their taxes for this year because of that.
So why isn't Mark Carney and Brookfield Asset Management being held to account by Liberal voters to pay their fair share?
Well, because he's rich, that's why.
I did not really respond to the question as to your opinion as to if it was ethical, but let me follow up on that. You wrote a book, Values. The thesis of that book was that capitalism or markets left to their own devices don't help humanity. For years, your party, the Liberal Party, has promised to stop the practice of tax avoidance that Brookfield and other companies have engaged in. Do you have the tools to do that? You said so. When are you going to release and tell Canadians what those tools are, and when will you implement them?
Notice the smile when Judy was saying, so you wrote a book, and he's like, oh, you're going to bring up my book. And then she started calling out problematic passages from the book, and then all of that drained from his face once again.
Well, and I suspect that this is why the Liberals wanted an election so soon after having Carney as leader, because the more time that goes on, the more Canadians learn about Mark Carney and the less likely they're going to want to vote for him. Again, they chose the smallest window for an election that is legally permitted by Elections Canada.
And here's one of the most important points here, folks, and why the Liberals probably should have tried, although weak as it was, to choose a leader from their bench. This is one of the most important reasons. Because all of the skeletons that they have in their closet are already known. When it comes to Pierre Poilievre, 20 years he's been in the political eye, which means there's been 20 years of his opponents trying to find something in his past, trying to find something that he said, trying to find something that he's done, to try to throw it in his face, to discredit him, to completely get rid of him from the political scene. And they've tried for 2 years, and he has been relatively squeaky clean. The issue is when you bring somebody in from outside that hasn't been in politics, there has been zero examination of what skeletons might be in that person's closet. So now, within literally weeks, you have a whole truckload of things that have been uncovered from Mark Carney and are being just thrown at him left, right, and center. This is the advantage of having a career politician. You already know the ins and outs of them.
Right, he knows what to say and not say.
Well, and he knows what people are going to come at him with.
Right.
Because he knows his past, and he knows if anyone was going to dig anything up, it would have come up already, especially from the Trudeau government over the last 10 years. But when it comes to Mark Carney, people are just getting started with him.